So the real big challenge of nanotech is how do you retain nanoscope level properties over meter squared lengths? And that's why the real manufacturing and engineering excellence lies in that we're able to translate these materials which are of such small dimensions into forms which can be industrialized at scale, which can be consumed by industry. Of course, apart from this, I mean, we've taken a green approach, which is a specific secondary benefit by itself. Because energy, what we realize, is a cost game. A lot of people love talking about green. No one really likes a green premium. So the goal was how do you do all this while also being green and not charging a green premium for the solution? So that is really the most difficult aspect of the innovation.
Hi, wherever you're joining me, I hope you're doing well. Welcome to India Tech Report, a platform dedicated to chronicling and supporting the growth of India's deep tech and climate tech ecosystems, with the occasional segue into other areas of tech entrepreneurship. I'm Hari Arakli, and you're listening to my In Conversation podcast. And my guests today are Murari Ramkumar and Dr. Nagesh Kini, founders of Vimano, a deep tech startup headquartered in Bengaluru specializing in advanced nanotechnology and material science. The company focuses on developing ion-conductive membranes that are critical components for energy transition applications, including redox flow batteries, electrolysers for green hydrogen production, and proton exchange membrane fuel cells. In this conversation, Murari and Dr. Nagesh give us a glimpse into their journey that started with a chance encounter at the well known industrial engineering company Thermax and has grown to a venture funded membrane technologies startup with early customers, including the Indian Space Research Organization. In this episode, the two entrepreneurs also delve into some of the technical and entrepreneurial hurdles building a deep tech startup in India, from fashioning their own manufacturing tools to navigating the funding landscape and scaling up in a resource constrained environment. In fact, Murari and Dr. Nagesh bootstrapped Vimano for 5 years before Ankur Capital led their first institutional funding round recently. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a scientist, or simply curious about the future of deep tech in India, in this episode we offer a glimpse into a journey of turning lab scale innovation into globally relevant products and solutions. Murari, Mr. Nagesh, thank you both for making time for this, doing this with me today, and really looking forward to our conversation. By the way, I was introduced to Vimano by Vishal at Ankur. I did not know about your work before that, although you all have been doing this quietly for now, I think, 6, 7 years. For a general audience, maybe you all can start with a brief backgrounder on why and how Vimano was started, and I'll go from there.
Sure, maybe I can begin with the second question in the set of questions you gave in terms of how did we meet? And then maybe from there we'll evolve into how did Vimano start? So I actually met Dr. Nagesh at Thermax in 2015 as an intern. So that was our first ever meeting. So I was doing my undergraduate studies in NIT Surathkal in material science and metallurgy, and Thermax used to offer internships, and that's how I ended up meeting Dr. Nagesh. So this is way back in 2015, and this was also my very first exposure into the energy world. So Thermax was working on a wide range of energy conversion technologies, a huge variety, and that was my first total exposure to both Nagesh as well as the energy world. Subsequently, I went to the US to do my master's in again material science and nanotech, and we were working on a lot of clean room based devices. And one of the devices I was working on was actually brain computer interfaces. So basically, devices which go into the head, and they had a specialty property that it could go in hard, absorb water, and become soft. So that is a first level material innovation, which materials which are hard goes into the environment, it has to operate and become soft. And a key goal in measuring these devices was looking at charge transport because the body is filled with ions. So you look at ion transport, and that's where the ideas kind of cross pollinated, and we subsequently decided to form Vimano in terms of can we apply these insights of a advanced material, advanced devices, and ion transport into the energy transition. because we realized there was a huge energy transition happening. So that's how kind of the ideas cross pollinated and led to where it was. And then subsequently, I decided that cost of doing R&D in India was going to be significantly lesser than in the US, and that I would need a technical co-founder to like realize the vision. So relocated back to India in hopes of convincing Dr. Nagesh to quit from Thermax, because you know how hard it is to convince people to quit from corporate to startups. And in India, the startup culture was in deep tech, especially, wasn't that big yet. So that successfully happened in 2020, and then he quit from Thermax and joined full time. And incidentally, both of us were also part of Entrepreneur First in 2020. Both of us got independently selected. Though the program is designed to help you find co founders, we both applied it with the intent of getting trained in certain facets of entrepreneurship. So we both were EF fellows, and then we kickstarted our journey from there. And the initial co-creation was done in IISc. We were lucky. He's my co-founder is an alumnus from IISc, and we kicked off some work there, and then things have since then ballooned up. So that's like a brief history, and then over to Nagesh to give his intro.
Okay, yeah, Hari, actually, I have post my PhD from ISC. I was abroad for 4.5 years. I was in South Korea on a short while, for a short while, and then I moved to Germany, Max Planck Institute, Dresden. I worked as a visiting scientist for two years. Then I moved to Hiroshima University on JS Space Fellowship. And 2006, upon my return, I joined Jawaharlal Nehru Center for Advanced Scientific Research as a fellow. That was about 1.5 years, and after 10 years of academic R&D, I moved to industry. For a large part of my career, I was at Thermax. I joined in 2009 April, and 2020 January end. That was the last working day for me. Then during these 10 years, I established a Center of Excellence Material Science. The opportunity I got there was actually to marry the knowledge, expertise, experience I had, which is in material science, with the area of interest for the company. Company was making, Thermax is known for boilers, vapor absorption machines, chemicals, water business, very wide variety of business built around boilers. But then the R&D was focused entirely on emerging technologies, fuel cells, flow batteries, lithium-ion batteries, hydrogen generation, coal to liquid, coal gasification, a very wide variety of emerging technologies. That's when I got a very good exposure to energy. But then when we decided to get into, become entrepreneurs, we had to choose something that we are good at doing, and then that is also useful for a area which is emerging, because if you want to be an entrepreneur, do something new, innovative, and then sell, you should be contributing to an emerging field. Energy obviously was an emerging field. Of course, it's an evergreen, but then the new green tech, clean tech, etc., were emerging then. So that's when we decided that we need to identify something that we will be able to contribute entirely based on our core expertise, which is materials synthesis, characterization, testing, etc. So we identified membranes to be one of the components that is actually critical in most of the electrochemical devices. Why electrochemical devices is because most of the emerging technologies, if you see, whether it is battery, fuel cell, electrolyzers for green hydrogen, etc., they all need this one component called membrane. That has to be a ion conducting membrane. That is where we focused, and then we thought this is a good area where we can contribute significantly through our innovation. That's how we got into membrane area. So today Vimano is a membrane company. Probably in India we are the only company that makes flat membranes for electrochemical devices, ion conducting membranes. We also got into collaboration with ISRO in the last 4 years. We recently got our films qualified for space application with ISRO. We already supplied 2 consignments. The third consignment is on the way, and we are expecting a little larger order by the end of this year.
I want to ask you to tell us a bit more about the product initially idea that you had and what you've developed. But before that, I'm curious about the significance of the name Vimano. How did that happen?
So it's a portmanteau of three words actually. So since we zoned in on energy, and then like Dr. Nagesh was mentioning, our expertise was in materials and nanoscience. It was a combination of these three words Virya in Sanskrit means energy or intensity. Materials MA and nano NO. So V ma no. So energy through materials and nanoscience was the basis for what we thought we were creating. Can we create sustainable, more efficient and cost-effective materials through nanoscience for energy? So that's how the name came about.
Dr. Nagesh, sir, you mentioned flat membranes while you're talking about your work. For a layperson, can you give us a brief idea of the significance of flat membranes? Give us a simple explanation of what they are and how they are used in the different applications that you're talking about.
See, in the industry, whenever people talk about membranes who have little initiation into this field, they invariably refer to membranes that are made in hollow fiber shape, which is used as commodities in most of the the water filtration technologies like RO, etc. So they are not ion conducting membranes and they are sold as commodity on a large scale. When we focused on membranes, because our application, envisaged application was electrochemical devices, specifically flow batteries and electrolyzers and fuel cells. So they need a different type of membrane, which are ion conducting membrane, and they are used in the form of a flat membrane. They are not, made into a form of a tube. In that way, the membranes we are making are slightly different in two ways. One is that our membranes are not commodity product like hollow fiber membranes, which are used in water filtration, etc. And second is that our membranes are ion conducting, which are specifically used in electrochemical devices, which are main devices in the emerging technologies like fuel cells and flow batteries and electrolyzers.
So the way to envisage or think of the membrane is like a traffic controller. So it's like a high throughput filtration unit for ions. And that's where the magic lies in that we have an ionic filter. It's easy to separate big particles, but we have the ability to choose between particles which are extremely similar in size and extremely small. And this is facilitated by the fact that these membranes are ionic filters, and that's why they need to be dense. And the real value is that the more charge you can move through a specific area, the smaller the devices get. Much like how the chips for the PCs shrunk the mainframe from a huge mainframe to small devices, the same value is kind of envisaged by these membranes. By having more throughput in a controlled area, you can directly impact your cost to build as well as your efficiency to run these devices over long times. So that's the real value in that it shrinks the overall footprint of the system and it makes these systems more efficient.
And since you talk about nano membranes, again, from a layperson's point of view, can you give us a sense of what is it in the membrane that is actually at nanoscale? Are these the pathways through which the ions move? What is the nano referring to?
You've partly given the answer as well, the question and the answer. But yes, prima facie, one of the aspects is the pathways which allow or facilitate ion movement. The second is also the materials which are incorporated within the matrix or the entire membrane. They are of a nano dimension, or they generally are of, they only have two dimensions. And the reason this is important is when you're doing filtrations of a nano scale, it's extremely useful if you have barriers which are of nano size as well. So you can effectively sieve out materials of those dimensions more effectively. So it does a couple of things. One, it creates more pathways. Two, it blocks items you don't want to move through the membrane, keep substances you don't want to go through the membrane out, which is what makes these membranes selective. And three, these nanoscale reinforcements also increase the strength and stability of these structures so that they can last in the operating environment of these devices.
So, typically, in the type of membranes that you're now manufacturing and selling, uh, what is a good way to understand the size of one pathway? I mean, do you look at it in terms of X number of nanometers? How do you do that?
Yeah, so we calculate something very similar or analogous, which is in terms of conductivity. So the way we normalize everything is how conductive is your substrate. And by virtue of increasing your conductance, generally there's a huge reduction in resistance. And gently resistance reduction leads to two benefits. One, it leads to lesser materials needed to deliver the same power, and also more increased efficiency or energy efficiency. So that's how it directly correlates to cheaper cost, because the performance of this entire device is now enhanced.
But is it possible, or in the industry, is there a way to sort of in a simple manner to look at these membranes? I mean, would you say this is a 100 nanometer membrane or whatever like that? I mean, I'm just thinking aloud. How does that work?
Sure. So there are three length scales we have to be mindful of in terms of how these nanotech levers play out. One is the actual size, like what you're quantifying of the actual materials, and that is in the nanometer regime. The thickness of the finished product is generally in microns, which is basically like the dimensions of our hair. What industry expects is that this to be recreated in meter square. So the real big challenge of nanotech is how do you retain nanoscope level properties over meter squared lengths? And that's why the real manufacturing and engineering excellence lies in that we're able to translate these materials which are of such small dimensions into forms which can be industrialized at scale. So basically retaining the nano level features or morphologies of these materials, converting them into micron level sheets, which can then be productized to meter square based length, which can be consumed by industry, because ultimately industry wants to see large structures so that they can build industrial stacks. Otherwise the perception is nano stays in the lab, doesn't come out of the lab. Can this be scaled? So the whole magic also lies in how do you translate and not lose these properties of these unique materials when you are scaling them to meters and meters of length, ideally kilometers of length.
Okay, very fascinating. So I think it's probably at at this moment it's a good opportunity to ask you about the most important applications currently that your product is being used for. Since you said they need to be sort of large, format or large form factor, but very thin films, as Dr. Nagesh called earlier.
Yeah, precisely. That's the well articulated way to look at it. So how we visualize is our membrane technology is like a membrane platform with three broad buckets of use cases. Number one is for stationary power or stationary electricity through these type of devices called flow batteries. So flow batteries are unique in that they're very similar to DG sets. You have a diesel generator and then you have the diesel outside. So that's how a flow battery is also constructed. You have a flow battery stack, and the equivalent of diesel is your charged liquid which doesn't burn up. So you have something analogous to diesel. And the uniqueness of flow batteries, unlike batteries, is that in a battery you can't take the lithium out of the battery. The lithium is within the cell, and the cell gets transported everywhere. In this case, just like the diesel, you can take out the material out of the cell like vanadium, ion, etc., all these liquid safe water based materials, carry it anywhere you want, put it into your battery, and you get power out. And the real value of these batteries is that they can store power for long durations. And this is very important because the current ways we visualize batteries is that these are small packets of energy which sustain us for a certain period of time. And these batteries can radically shift how electricity itself is distributed because they can act as the base load power. So they can be a continuous power source for hours, days, weeks, months, and years. And that's really the final tipping point to make your renewable assets go round the clock. So that's the real value add of these batteries. The only drawback is that these batteries are meant to be stationary assets. They're not going to go directly onto a bus or a laptop or a phone. They're going to go into use cases where you need stationary electricity to say power a small house, power a building, power a charging station, those kind of use cases. So that was our prima facie use case, targeting grid scale energy storage through these type of devices called flow batteries. But along the way, as we co-developed this technology, because battery testing was taking some time, because you can't enter batteries very easily unless you prove that you're rigorous enough to last the number of cycles needed. Once this is demonstrated, this translates into huge commercialization potential, but you can't jump that initial testing phase because you have to prove and demonstrate that you can cycle your components again and again over extended periods of time. So what we kind of did is we took a platform approach where these we tweaked these membranes for few other use cases where membranes were a key enabler, as Dr. Nagesh had mentioned. And the second set of categories of devices we were tuning these membranes for were for hydrogen based devices. And under hydrogen based devices, these membranes do two things. One, it can help you produce hydrogen or create a synthetic fuel like hydrogen. And two, it can also work with existing hydrocarbon based liquid fuels, different types of fuels, and convert them into usable power for mobility based applications. So that's the unique feature set of these membranes. They not only help you make a green synthetic fuel, they can also work with existing either biogas, methanol, natural gas also, and convert them into cleaner power without really burning them like your current generators. So those were the two broad north stars of Vimano. And along with that, we've also cracked a small use case with ISRO, where these membranes are going into satellites. So those are the three broad verticals we're currently focusing on: batteries, hydrogen, satellites.
The hydrogen aspect is the electrolyzers that you have mentioned on your website.
Yeah, electrolyzers. Yes.
That's right.
Yeah, when it comes to electrolyzers, you see, most of the electrolyzers that are used currently deployed for making hydrogen, they are called a type of electrolyzers which are called alkaline electrolyzers. Of course, there are PEM-based electrolyzers, proton exchange membrane-based electrolyzers. There are two types actually. PEM-based electrolyzers work on pure water, whereas alkaline electrolyzers work on potassium hydroxide solution usually. So when it comes to PEM electrolyzers, the stack that produces hydrogen are expensive because of the catalysts that are used. The catalysts used are invariably platinum, iridium. Platinum is actually expensive and iridium is supply chain constrained. That's why more and more people are looking at alkaline electrolyzers. They are cheap, they don't need expensive catalysts. But then, when you look at the technology of alkaline electrolyzers, the age old technology uses a separator, not a membrane. The main difference between a separator and a membrane is that a separator is physically porous, whereas a membrane that we use are solid membranes, where the ions move through the membrane like electrons move through a copper sheet. Solid membrane where the ions are moving. So they are ion conducting membranes. The advantage of using an ion conducting membrane is that you don't need expensive catalysts, and hence the stack cost can be significantly reduced.
Okay. Now, can you talk about? I mean, so we have a bit of background about all the different things in which your films are being used. Now probably is a good time for you to talk about what is sort of really core to your innovation in the films that you are producing. What is proprietary to Vimano?
Yeah, sure. Of course, there is the overall, if we have filed an IP in multiple geographies with a PCT, but apart from the IP, there is also what we have built as proprietary knowledge is a lot of trade secrets in terms of the art of creating the biggest challenge is retaining these nanoscale features in a mega scale, if I had to say that. So those are some of the trade secrets we have developed in terms of processing know-how and methods to be able to convert these very, very extremely thin structures into films. But apart from that, the core proprietary IP essentially lies in few things. One is the composition of material, which are basically the formulations which lead to these specific type of properties, and basically the methods of manufacturing which can convert these different types of composition of matter into these thin sheets, as well as the item of manufacture itself, which is the design of the membrane. Because ultimate, what the kind of sweet spot we also realized was in the industry, people were using membranes and designing their systems around the existing membranes. And when we started Vimano, we thought, can we flip that model of design into an inverse design way, where we create membranes only tailored for specific applications. So that's where essentially the crux of our technology lies: trade secrets in the scale up, protected patents in the formulations, compositions of matter, and the method of manufacturing. And also, most critically and importantly, the design of membranes to solution them for specific use cases rather than how currently membranes were being consumed, in that existing membranes were taken and systems were retrofitted around these membranes. So that's where the crux of our innovation lies. Of course, apart from this, I mean, we've taken a green approach, which is a specific secondary benefit by itself. But because energy, what we realize is a cost game, and even though a lot of people love talking about green, no one really likes a green premium. So the goal was, how do you do all this while also being green and not charging a green premium for the solution. So that is really the most difficult aspect of the innovation.
So, in terms of the form factor today, what is the largest size of your membrane that you're making?
So roughly, we're able to make about half a meter by half a meter today.
Now, it's a long journey actually. When we started in IAC, we started making very small membranes of 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters. And then we graduated to A4 size, 20 centimeters by 30 centimeters. In due course of time, we got some grant from UNIDO to enable us to build tools that will help us in making much larger membranes than that. So today we are able to make half meter by half meter membrane in small quantities, of course, one membrane a day. So the production volumes are low, but the dimensions are large enough for testing in a stack in most of the devices we are wanting to deploy them. So this round of funding will help us in scaling up the production volume also, besides the dimensions.
Hmm. I'm curious about how your membranes are being used in the satellite applications in the case of ISRO. Can you explain that?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, these are different types of membranes. They're not ion conducting membranes. ISRO is already using these by importing them from US. So we are making them in India. It's a sort of a import substitution. The biggest challenge for us was that it was an established and accepted product for usage in satellites within ISRO, which they were importing, and beating the imported membranes in quality was the biggest challenge. So they had given us about 15 different parameters to be tested performance, and we did that successfully. Initially, we gave them small A4 size membranes and also a little larger membranes in the second consignment. And now we are expecting a much larger order. For us, ISRO is actually Make in India. I mean, we are Make in India partners for ISRO. Volumes are not large, but then we think that being in India, being able to establish this, we should be able to do something for the country. We felt this is a good opportunity for us, and also to demonstrate the kind of skill set we have, what we can do. So that's a big boost of morale for us.
What is the purpose for which these membranes are used in the satellites?
Yeah, so they effectively act as very efficient passive thermal management for satellites. So think of them as a AC without electricity. So the sole feature of these membranes is that you have to deflect heat and radiation from space back into deep space, because deep space is the ultimate sink. So basically, you want to reduce the heat load of satellites, because satellites have to be managed within a certain temperature regime. And either if you overheat it, basically you lose fuel efficiency, and you have a threat to your electronics, which are extremely critical to protect. So they act as a heat shield in some sense to deflect radiation back into deep space. So of course, they have very specific properties which ensure that it absorbs as less thermal incoming radiation as possible, and you have to emit as much as possible, which is kind of like a paradox. You're not supposed to absorb, but you're supposed to emit a lot. So that's where the little bit of process magic lies on how do you create these properties which can effectively do orthogonal stuff at the same time, and essentially ensure that your satellite is it's lasting throughout the life of the satellite. So that's why it took a lot of time and rigor, because you have to be subjecting it to a battery of tests and under extreme environments. So it has to be withstanding radiation, extreme temperature swings, extreme electrical properties, extreme mechanical properties, etc., etc.
Um, how are you doing as a business? I mean, you've already started shipping products to customers, even well-known ones like ISRO. Would you say you have hit the so-called product market fit, or you're on track to do that? Where would you put yourself on that commercialization path?
Yeah, sure. I would say it's a bit of both, and I would like to answer these questions by bringing up three scales and tying these three scales to the products we're working with. So there are three important parameters when measuring, I mean, deep tech startups, especially like us, in that there's a technology readiness level, there's a manufacturing readiness level, and there's an adoption readiness level. And we have to go up on the scale in all these three scales for us to be able to successfully say that we are on track for large scale commercialization, and product market fit has been established without doubt. And across these verticals, we're at different TRL, MRL, and ARL scales for these different use cases. And with each of these use cases, some scales are higher, some scales are lower. And I would say, in terms of the use cases, in the battery use case, the TRL is maybe the highest along with the satellites. The hydrogen use case, the TRL is a bit lower compared to the other use cases. The MRL across these devices is the same because the manufacturing tooling line we're setting up is common across these platforms. And part of the goal of this fundraise is to increase the MRL of across these technology platforms. The adoption readiness level is highly a function of the clients we are working with and the end users these ultimate devices go to. So, just to give you an example, even if you are saying your technology readiness is pretty high for your batteries and you're able to manufacture, it has to be ready in the adoption readiness scale for the ultimate end user, which might be the grid or a charging station, where certain more parameters and system level designs have to be incorporated before this product completes its entire life cycle of going to the ultimate end consumer. So even though we are B2B and we're not B2C, the entire value chain of commercialization and the product market fit gets established once this product propagates across the value chain. But having said that, there are use cases, smaller use cases where these technologies are ready to be adopted. Certain use cases where it's lesser on the scale of adoption for certain extreme end users like the grid or distribution companies. So it's a function of, summarize again, function of three things: the technology readiness level, the manufacturing readiness level, and the adoption readiness level. And it's tied to different end users and sectors based on the devices we're working with.
Overall, would it be difficult to say you're at TRL 6 or 7 or something like that?
I mean, if you had to give a weighted score across our various use cases, I would say that's a good representation between 6 to 7. Yeah, that's right. But broadly speaking, I could say at a business model level, we work with essentially two types of people: people who manufacture devices. That's our core target market segment. Can be different types of devices, but people who are fundamentally manufacturing stacks and devices, we work with them. We also work with big corporates and as system integrators, where we kind of co-develop solutions and fit it towards them. So that's our broader, higher level, I mean, 50,000 feet level understanding of the business model. We are B2B. We supply to people who make devices and different types of devices.
Okay. Um, when Dr. Nagesh talked about how you made your own tools, that sort of caught my attention. It was in the back of my mind. Also, in the context of lessons from building your company mostly out of Bangalore, can you talk about that? I mean, sort of top level lessons, and to what extent you had to build your own tools and other technical infrastructure which you did not have or could not source even by importing and things like that. Just walk us through that journey a little bit.
Well, actually, we didn't have that any kind of embargo for importing. So our constraint was funding. We were bootstrapped for almost 5 years, and we had very limited amount of money. The kind of money that is required to buy, procure, and install these tools in house is so huge that even if we had spent all the money we had, we wouldn't have been able to house one or two of them. So each of them costs crores. So then we thought that we should do two things. One is that we should build instruments on our own, build these tools on our own, using the existing vendors, identifying those who are competent to do that in and around Bangalore. That was as far as the tools are concerned. That we did successfully, and we went step by step. Initially, we were making small membranes. We learned a lot of things from that. Then the heating methods and then the casting methods, etc. We learned a lot and then used that in building the next level tools. That's what we did as far as the tools are concerned. And then the materials characterization, we had to do a lot of testing. Once you make a membrane, if you don't test, we have no data to share with our device manufacturing partners. For that, what we did was to work with institutes, IASC, IIT Madras. We identified professors who are working in this field, talked to them, sent our membranes, got them tested, and simultaneously working with our foreign collaborators to test our membranes. So that's how we were able to make the tools here as well as get them tested here in a very frugal manner. The challenge was to identify right partners who are serious about working with us and who would actually go out of way to help us. That we did successfully. So what came in handy was my own past career. You know, I was in academics for about 10 years before joining industry. Then I was in industry for 10 years, which gave me a very good exposure to these technology areas as well as the corporate culture. So I thought, this is a good opportunity for me to use both those expertise to bring in this into reality.
Hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating. Even at a broader level, I mean, and that's a whole conversation in itself. In terms of people with deep expertise like you, 20 plus years, are now actually translating the lab to commercial product. So something really heartening to see. Anyway, can you give me one example of a type of tool or instrument that you sort of built on your own, and what you use it for?
Well, actually, except one tool that we imported, everything else is built here. So the tools that are required to make a solution, mix nano additives in it, get a homogeneous solution, then cast them into membranes, heat them. All these are the different types of tools that are required. And one set of tools that you develop for a particular size cannot be used. You need to scale up everything. The whole set of tools that you need for making a larger membrane are entirely different. And then you have scale up issues. So those needed to be sorted out. We did all that successfully and eventually ended up making half meter by half meter membranes. Now, today, we are able to make larger membranes, consistent quality. So we have tested them. One difficulty we still have in testing the large membranes is that our stack manufacturers have larger stacks that can only accommodate larger dimensional membranes, but they need it in larger numbers. For example, if one stack needs to be developed, whether it is for a flow battery or electrolyzer, they need about 20, 30 membranes of those dimensions. So that we were not able to make because our capacity was only to make one membrane a day. So that was not sufficient.
Hmm. Yeah. Can you talk about this a bit more at a slightly sort of higher level, in the sense that at this point today, where you're at, um, what are the top challenges? Is this about scaling your product now in terms of the capacity? And will you be able to find a contract manufacturer, or do you need to set up your own factory? How will all this work?
Yeah, sure. So, uh, our goal right now is to go into our own factory space, basically expand from the current location we are to do the first level of scale, which is to get to about 50 meters square of membrane production a month. And that is a critical inflection point, even if we want to think of further types of how we scale this business in terms of licensing out this manufacturing or co-developing it with a big partner. We will not be able to access these sorts of opportunities if we don't demonstrate this minimum amount of scale, which is the minimum viable scale for people to build plants of a certain size. So basically, you need to be able to demonstrate to the entire value chain that you can at least make these membranes which can be consumed at a kilowatt to a megawatt level. So that is the entire purpose of this fundraise, is to demonstrate that we can set up the environments needed to be able to produce these membranes of a certain scale. And what this also necessitates is creating certain base levels of infrastructure where we have to eliminate the big things like dust, water, oxygen. And so we have to create micro environments where these things do not exist. And apart from the manufacturing itself, the base level of infrastructure which is needed to be able to produce films in a controlled environment is large. So we're doing this in a stage gated manner where we are first setting up the infrastructure layers needed to create a controlled environment, because apart from, I mean, doing this one membrane in a day is when things go absolutely fine. But as you know, I mean, things get really messy in Bangalore. There's too much of dust suddenly, or there's too much of rains, and then everything goes into havoc. So first is creating an environment where external factors don't influence our production. Then two, setting up the production line so that this production line is streamlined with the kind of dimensions needed to produce. And three is also recreate the performance, because even if you do all this, if you're not getting the performance, you have lost all the value of the work you have put in. And three, to complete the value chain is to prove that now at this enhanced scale, at these enhanced throughputs, we're able to recreate the performance needed for a global value chain and a global supply chain. Because beyond, I mean, when you're playing in a global game, no one really cares where you're from. unless you're trying to go for a play where that you're just trying to make some sort of low cost component. If you're going for a really high value component, they really care that it's met with certain consistency, with certain levels of repeatable performance. So that is our major goal and major challenge, which we were trying to get over and establish that these things can be repeated at scale with the same level of consistency we've got till this point. That is the biggest milestone we would be achieving with this round.
Mm. Your most recent fundraising, which is your first significant institutional funding, was $3 million, right, led by Ankur. And is this an ongoing round right now?
Oh, no, it's a closed round. Basically, it's about $2.9 million with Ankur Capital leading the round as the lead investor. So they invested about $1.9 million, and then we had a collection of co-investors. So we formed a syndicate, and the syndicate partners chipped in for the remaining $1 million. They were also equally important in terms of helping facilitate close the round and and form a full syndicate, because that really helps set up, even also apart from this manufacturing, to keep the R&D engine going, because R&D forms the backbone, not basic R&D, but this is highly applied R&D, somewhat like Pasteur's fourth quadrant, highly application driven scientific development, so that we can get the product out there to market. And this necessitates having access and continuing the R&D engine. So the sum total of these partners form this full round, and this is a priced seed round of funding. And before this, we were lucky enough to have two grants. So we put in our own capital and raised some money from global investors through a safe instrument to the tune of about $700,000. So before this $2.9 million round, there was bootstrap plus grants plus funds plus safe instruments for about $700,000.
And so, are you now in parallel talking to investors for further funding, or this current round gives you some runway?
So the current round gives us so actually the current round does give us some runway. But what we've understood from the fundraising journey so far is that fundraising many times can also be a buyer's decision rather than only a seller's decision. So there is some small amount of the fundraising continuing to happen in parallel, even though we have raised this round, and this round should facilitate our growth for the next 24 months. But at the same time, we've also realized that things in the market are sometimes can also be out of control. We have to be opportunistic as a company. When people are ready to deploy the capital, absorb the capital, but we also have to show and demonstrate readiness that we're able to absorb this new level of capital to deploy it efficiently and be capital efficient. So it's a function of both things. We do have our own roadmaps and milestones on when we want to hit and how we want to hit these milestones and when we want to raise this ticket, basically a Series A round of funding. At the same time, however, as a startup, we have to be ruthlessly opportunistic. And if the right opportunity presents itself, we have to be positioned ourselves in a way such that we can absorb this new influx of capital.
How many people today? I would imagine at this point you're still very R&D heavy, and now you're beginning to add sales and marketing. Overall, how many people?
So right now we have about 10 full time and then 6 part time. And like you said, the goal is still heavily R&D focused and getting some more application development scientists in, because they kind of in the commercial terms what they use as pre-sales is done by the application development scientists here, because they form the feature set and the tech specs which are critical for people to make a buy decision. So the team is going to be developed around the core offerings of core materials engineers and scientists.
And this all is happening in Bangalore, right?
Yes, that's right. So we're headquartered in the US, and the Bangalore company is a 100% subsidiary of the American entity. And Bangalore is where we'll be expanding the base. Maybe a small team also coming up in the US towards the early part of next year.
Will that be more market slash customer facing, or are there still some areas where you may need to recruit technical experts in the US?
Yes, it's a bit of both. Definitely, we would. The one of the massive advantages of the American and the European ecosystem is that they already have certain levels of infrastructure ready for testing and certain layers of technology which they have deep domain sectorial knowledge. For example, in semicon, etc., where they actually have fabs, India still doesn't have fabs. So one of the things we need is a clean room, which is commonly used in fabs. So one of the massive advantages of operating in the United States would be that we can latch on to existing infra and don't have to worry about the infrastructure creation layer and build on top of it. So any layers we're building on top of the membrane for certain specific niche use cases, that would open up avenues for us to accelerate that go to market in terms of accelerating that TRL scale where we're at, and at the same time also ensure that we're able to have access to certain device manufacturers who are co-located in Europe and US, because India still doesn't have as many device manufacturers as Europe and US. So which is why even though we're located out of India, a lot of our business is export oriented.
So, Murari, you mentioned milestones and plans. This is sort of my question as we begin to wrap up. I mean, over the next 12 to 18 months, or even over the 2 years that you're looking at, both in terms of product development as well as your go-to market, as they say in startup jargon, what are your top priorities?
So I think the biggest challenge, right, is that for a startup to really be successful is to convert a really good product into a great product. So right now, what we have is a really good product. People are interested. People are placing small orders. But the harsh truth is, you will only have a sticky product if it's a great product, and there's like reasons for people to really stick with us in spite of all sorts of competing forces. And that is really, really hard in these kind of legacy sectors where the incumbent is like 20, 30 years entrenched into the market. So they've clearly built huge economic, technological, operational moats to get to this point of barriers such that even countries are not able to produce products competing with these few companies. So our goal is essentially to consolidate on the great work we have done and make a really good product into a great product, which ensures that we are sticky. That is the biggest leap we have to make. And from this stage on, even every 1% requires tremendous effort, as much effort as it took to get to this point. So essentially, to form the team to help us sustain this level of growth and to convert this really good product into a great product is the ultimate holy grail for Vimano. And that way, we can then form a globally relevant supply chain around us. So that's the ultimate dream of getting to that point. And what we're trying to do is strengthen ourselves across multiple domains in terms of people, infrastructure, support systems so that we can get to that point. So that is the goal for us over the next 24 months.
That's it for this conversation. For my pick of daily headlines on deep tech and climate tech news from India and around the world, please look for my India Tech Report Daily Morning Brief podcast. If you'd like to support my work, please subscribe to my free newsletter, India Tech Report. I'm Hari Arakli. Thank you for joining me.